All right. Greetings and welcome. My name is Bob Eisenberger. Penny Andrews and I prepare these monthly webinars for you as part of our ongoing search for understanding in the world of creation spirituality today. Um, Together in these, we are tracking the creative intelligence of humanity as it weaves itself into a global consciousness that has been named the noosphere by Pierre Desjardins 100 years ago. Nous, Greek for mind, and sphere for the layer of consciousness that is surrounding and interacting with the other layers on this planet, the biosphere and the geosphere. Today, we are participating in this developing new sphere, intent on participating in a global change of consciousness. Our guests today are Joe Brewer and his partner Penny Heiple, who have for years now been educating communities around the world about the importance of a bioregional perspective in planning for and managing our local communities. Penny.
Welcome, and it's great to be back. And particularly thrilling to have these guests that I was able to meet in person this June as they made their trek across the upper Mississippi River, as well as the rest of the Mississippi River watershed, and to hear their stories that they'll be sharing with us today. I'm going to start by reading the ingathering that we offered to their visit in Madison, where it is my home. And I am part of the upper Mississippi River Basin watershed. We have arrived, and now we gather in. Travelers across prairies and river corridors, through oak savannas and glacial moraines. All our journeys, personal, ancestral, ecological, intersect here in this moment of shared intention. We come carrying lifetimes of seeking, desire for belonging, devotion to place, yearning for deeper community with all that has birthed us, shaped us, and continues to whisper us forward. We gather not as strangers, but as kin, rediscovering one another in the great turning of our time. We start by honoring the Earth community. We begin in gratitude for habitats, ancestry, and living community that holds us. We stand within a terrain sculpted by the Wisconsin Ice Age, a land of drumlins and kettles, eskers and moraines, a geography written by glaciers retreating 10,000 years ago. The land is a teacher of contrasts, radiant summer light, profound winter silence, spring floods, autumn fire, and the rich black soils built beneath tall grasses over thousands of seasons. We give thanks. To the indigenous peoples, we acknowledge that we gather within the ancestral home of the Ho-Chunk Nation, people of the big voice, who have lived in relationship with these lakes, rivers, and prairies since time immemorial. The Ho-Chunk were removed not by distance but force, and yet they returned again and again, their belonging to this land unbreakable. We honor the Ho-Chunk and the Menominee, Potawatomi, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, Oneida, and Odawa peoples, whose relationships with these waters and woodlands stretch across generations beyond counting. For the Ho-Chunk, these lakes were a sacred center, sites of ceremony, sustenance, and story. Wetlands were libraries of relationships. Rivers were a connective tissue. Effigy mounds, shaped as birds, bears, and water spirits, remain as prayers in earth. As we convene this bioregional gathering, we acknowledge humanity has entered a time of profound disruption of the whole Earth community. The Mississippi River floods and dries beyond record. The lakes warm, ice arrives later and leaves sooner. Migration shift, and tall grass prairies that once covered 30 million acres now exist in fragments. Even as we feel the grief of the unraveling, we recognize the cosmic to participate in the transformation of our species, to cultivate a bioregionally rooted identity, and to take creative action towards a future. And to the emergent field. By our presence here, we acknowledge the centration with each of us that brings us to this moment, the fullness of 13.8 billion years it took us to arrive. We carry our starborn beginnings, our ancient origins in Earth's first life, the glacial shaping of our home, and the long arc of human evolution. We bring with us familial bonds, teachers and mentors, life-shaping allurements, knowledge transformed into wisdom, spiritual practices, struggles that open new doorways to creativity, beauty found and shared, awakenings in awe and wonder, curiosity that refuses to dim. In resonance and radiance, we bring all this and more to this emergent time together. Let us deepen in community as we come to understand our work together, made more resilient by our diversity and discovering synergies and surprises. Rooted here in the heart of the continent, held by waters that run to every sea, and accountable to the generations yet to come. Aho. So that was our ingathering in June. And as the day progressed and towards the evening, Joe's talk incorporated the universe and Thomas Berry's work. And Thomas Berry, the visionary that he was, rarely used the word bioregionalism in his early writings, but the concept is woven throughout his work. He consistently argued that humans should live within the ecological realities of the places they inhabit, rather than looking to political or economic abstractions. Berry's work is the philosophical foundation for regenerative design by recognizing rivers, forests, animals, and landscapes as living participants rather than resources. And he emphasized that while humanity shares one planet, we belong to distinct ecological communities. He writes, while Earth is a single integral community, it is not a global sameness. It is highly differentiated in bioregional communities. These bioregions can be described as identifiable geographical areas of interacting life systems that are relatively self-sustaining. Our studies in what we call ecology must lead to such intimacy with our natural surroundings. Only intimacy can save us from our present commitment to a plundering industrial economy. And lastly, he writes, the historical mission of our times is to reinvent the human within the community of life systems. So with that, I want to just introduce briefly Joe and Penny to you. They are gifted presenters, having moved many of our attendees in June, some of them to tears with the story of where we are and how difficult and dire it appears to be. And then the flip of it, which is what is possible if we begin to be like starlings and move in the same direction together. Joe is a transdisciplinary systems thinker, earth regeneration designer, and author of the book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. He draws from earth systems science, cognitive science, cultural evolution, and complexity. He works to help communities organize around bioregions. He helps cultivate a global network of bioregional learning exchanges that connect local action with planetary transformation. And most recently, he's helped to start a school that works with children to teach these very principles. Penny is a co-founder of the Design School for Regenerating Earth and a leader in the regenerative community building, organizational development, and bioregional learning. A native of Boulder, she now lives in Barichara, Colombia, where she works with Joe on projects that support ecological restoration and resilient local communities. Penny leads the design school's operation, strategic planning, and community development, while also facilitating its inner space program, which nurtures personal capacity needed for effective earth regeneration work. She is dedicated to helping people reconnect with place, with one another, and the living systems that sustain all life. And with that, I turn it over to both of you and am very excited to hear your stories and where you are today in your journey.
Thank you so much, Penny, and thank you, Bob, and thank you, everyone, for being here. So I'm going to start by setting some context and talking about some of the things that we're doing, and then Penny's going to share some of her experiences and insights from our journey. And one thing that we really want to emphasize as we begin is that while there's a lot of intellectual and theoretical, sort of in your head kind of knowledge that we have, that's mostly not what we are or what we do. We are very much about living the stories, living into this moment and embracing the chaos and the complexity and the grief and the pain, but also the possibilities that are beyond our imagination. And so we want to talk about that imagination beyond our own, the imagination of bioregions, the imaginations of Earth. And so I want to start by just giving a brief description of our current context. So this might be a review for some of you, but I think it's helpful to have a common place for beginning the conversation. So we are now in a time where we have ended the last ice age, in which was the first complete ice age that anatomically modern Homo sapiens could exist. Because anatomically modern Homo sapiens are about 400,000 years old. And so, so we've only been of this particular form of human for a few 100,000 years. And all of the other humans have gone extinct, with the Neanderthals being the most recent other human species that went extinct near the end of the last ice age. And at the end of the last ice age, when the Holocene began, about 11,000 years ago, something really interesting happened. Within about 1,000 years, in 5 different places around the world, the ability to create patriarchal, warlike, hierarchical societies that dominate and control fertility in the name that we call agriculture, and then to create city-states, empires, and civilizations, that all began about 11,000 years ago. And between then and now, we have about 300 documented city-states, empires, and civilizations, and 100% of them have collapsed because they are a self-terminating process. They basically destroy the foundations of their own domination, expansion, conquest, and growth. And that includes the current one. And so what's changed is about 500 years ago, the very first model of empire, conquest, and domination achieved the planetary scale. This is this period of corporatism, of nation states, of globalization, of colonization. starting with things like in the 1470s with the invention of double entry accounting in Venice. And in the year 1499, the Joint Stock Company, which gave rise to corporatism, which is the management framework of nation states. And then you fast forward and you've got fossil fuels and you've got a supercharged capacity for this conquest and extraction, leading up to the year 1970, which is when humanity crossed the carrying capacity of the planet, according to the Global Ecological Footprint Network. And so basically, humanity consumes more than the natural world is able to regenerate on its own as of about 1970. I was born in 1976. So I was born after humanity achieved ecological overshoot of the planet. This is important because several things happened around that time. One was about 10 miles from where I was born. I was born in Springfield, Missouri. The very first thinking was starting to happen about organizing a bioregional Congress, when one of the close friends of Thomas Berry, a man named David Hankey, who's originally from Michigan, but when he was 19 years old, he moved to South Central Missouri in the Ozarks. And he observed that when he walked out of his house into the forest in Missouri, at some point he was in the state of Arkansas, and he couldn't tell because it was the same forest. So the idea of these fake political boundaries didn't make much sense. And they started organizing what became the very first bioregional Congress, the Ozarks Area Community Congress, which was organized, that took place in 1980. But basically what's happened between around 50 years ago and now is the awakening of planetary consciousness. The photo of the blue marble was taken, the half disk of the Earth from space, the overview effect, the first operational satellites in the early 1970s, advanced computation and simulation, climate science, make your list, a bunch of stuff has happened. And basically, in this very same period of time, that we're actually able to grok and understand how our planet works, we're getting warning signs everywhere that we're about to drive ourselves extinct, alongside several million other species. And so while we talk about global warming and biodiversity loss and various other things, they're all symptoms of ecological overshoot. And ecological overshoot is a symptom of stories that humans live out that are disconnected from reality. And so it's in this context that we're in now that we want to share what we see as being needed. And I just want to name a couple of things, because I could say this is what Penny and I think is needed, but that would just be factually incorrect. It's really that the zeitgeist, or as Bob named, the noosphere, the collective understandings of humanity, have revealed what we need to do. So a couple of little moments in history. 1971, the very first computer simulation of the global economy and all of its stocks and flows of material exchange. A project led by a research team at MIT, a study that was published as a book called Limits to Growth, came out in 1972. And then for about 10 years, a lot of stimulating discussions all over the world in response to how to live within planetary limits. And in 1983, Donella Meadows, the lead author of that study, wrote a little essay called A Brief History of the Balaton Group about what they had explored in these 10 years of inquiry, where they found that the only way, this is like the best thinking of environmentalists and systems thinkers of the 70s and early 80s, in 1983, that the only way to get back within planetary limits, to achieve planetary sustainability, this is 1983, is to organize ourselves as local living economies, and for each local place being so unique in culture and ecology that each place needs to create its own bioregional learning center. And we need these all over the planet. So between 1983 and now, no one's come up with a better idea. This is it. Our game is to come back into right relationship with local places while coordinating within planetary processes to achieve a phased transition of story, where we go from stories of domination and separation and extraction and destruction back into stories of belonging, of connecting, of being present, of participating as part of the living planet. And so, in many ways, what Penny and I are doing through the design school and through the book that I wrote, which in a way is like a footnote to Dana Meadows, is we are picking up on what the bioregionalists started in the 1970s that led to the Green Cities movement and urban sustainability, that led to the anti-GMO movement around relocalizing food chains and native seeds, that led to the rights of nature movement, that led to land defense and indigenous rights, and many other things. What we're doing is building on that legacy. And we have a strategy, a way of understanding it. And what I want to do is briefly walk you through that strategy and then show you, or we'll share with stories, some of our experiences living it out. And so for this, I have a very brief presentation. It's really part of another presentation that I'd given once before, but I will share it here about the Dandelion strategy for birthing 1,000 bioregional learning centers between now and 2035. The time frame is that we're now in the acceleration of collapse of ecological and a social nature, which is completely unavoidable. We are decades too late to avoid this collapse. And we're now entering into the crossing of tipping points of the Earth system, the breakdown of our social institutions, the complete political capture of our governing bodies and democracies, also the surveillance state. I mean, you can make your list, right? There's a whole plethora of things that are sometimes called the polycrisis. And in this time of accelerating breakdown is exactly when we are released from the dominant structures of the power systems of that old order that are too powerful to stop. They are destroying themselves. And as they break down is exactly when we can compost those systems and build their replacements. And so what we need to do is organize bioregionally everywhere on Earth, simultaneously, within a window of time of accelerating breakdown. And it's in that time that we invoke the humble dandelion, because the dandelion shows us a way of thinking about strategy, which is that if you look at where this dandelion grew in the cracks in the sidewalk, no one could have predicted it would be there, because the dandelion is an evolutionary strategy that says, I don't know where are the best places to plant my seeds, so I'm going to embrace that ignorance, generate a whole bunch of seeds, release them in the wind, and some of them are going to dry out and die, and some of them will take root and germinate and grow. And my ignorance is incorporated into my strategy. In this time of extreme uncertainty and extreme complexity, planning goes out the window. You can't plan for the level of chaos that we're in. So what we need to do instead is have a pattern of humans coming back into relationship with their life places that are attempted in as many places as possible. And if at least one takes root and succeeds, then humans did not go extinct. That's like preparing for worst case scenarios, which is really smart during a time of extreme chaos and uncertainty. And so the strength is through the diversity and number of places that are attempting this. So our dandelion seed is bioregional learning centers, which is a way of thinking of doing whole system design for every way you need to learn how to live in place for any particular place. So a bioregional learning center will be different in the high plains of North Dakota or in Amarillo, Texas, than they would be in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, or than they would be in the Great Sahara Desert in southern Tunisia. That there is a uniqueness to each place. And in that essay that Dana Meadows wrote in 1983, she said this: out of 10 years of meetings, people all over the world, how to live within planetary limits, out came a vision of a number of centers where information and models about resources and the environment are housed. There would need to be many of these centers all over the world, each one responsible for a distinct bioregion, which is to say, we need to do whole system design for how we learn and also what we unlearn to live in each unique place. that is geologically, ecologically, climatically, and culturally unique, different from every other place on Earth. I wrote a book about this if you want to read it, so you can go check it out if you want to, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth, but you could also just come live it with us. So our dandelion strategy is to catalyze people to think this way, to plant the seeds of bioregional imagination all over the world. And we do this through many things, but one thing Penny and I do personally is bioregional pilgrimages, where we travel into landscape systems where we can directly witness what is happening and we can help people to see themselves as bioregional, which they already are, or they already have potential to be, but they may not know it. And so we did this in the month of June by traveling through the various landscapes of the Great Mississippi Basin. And what I want to emphasize here is the route that we took. And then I want to say who Mississippi is, not what. Because I thought, foolishly, as someone who's not indigenous from settler culture, I thought that Mississippi referred to the river. I was wrong. I accept that. Because the word Mississippi, which is an Ojibwe word, is very strange that Mississippi, unlike every other reference to water I know, is masculine, whereas water is the sacred feminine. And we almost always refer to rivers and water as feminine. But Mississippi is an Ojibwe word that means the father of all waters. The father of waters. That's so interesting. So when we started this journey, I was curious, will I discover how Mississippi is masculine? What does that even mean? And so we took the route that you see on this map. We followed a route during a little bit more than a month, visiting confluences of major rivers and headwaters of major rivers. We started in St. Louis, where the Missouri River joins the Mississippi River. We traveled into the Ozarks, the lower Missouri River Valley, which is near Kansas City. We traveled up into the Great Lakes Basin, technically leaving the Mississippi Basin for a moment to go to Milwaukee, because we had friends that are organizing a bioregional learning center there. And then we journeyed over into the Driftless region in Madison, Wisconsin, where we met Penny and others. And we were catalyzing the story of the dandelion strategy as we went. Then we went up to Lake Itasca in Minnesota, which is where the Mississippi River itself has headwaters, but stopping in Minneapolis, St. Paul at the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. And then we went out along major confluences and headwaters of the Missouri River, which is actually 500 miles longer than the Mississippi River. We went to North Dakota. We went to where the Yellowstone River meets the Missouri River, where the Milk River meets the Missouri River, to the headwaters of the Missouri River in Montana, to the headwaters of the Yellowstone River in Yellowstone National Park, to the headwaters of the Arkansas River, to the Front Range and part of the Platte River, the North and South Platte Rivers, going along the northern part of the Great Plains, down to Boulder, Colorado, making our way further south, the birthplace of the Cimarron River and Canadian River in New Mexico, went to Amarillo, Texas, where the Canadian River makes its way across the Great Plains, and people are working to regenerate the Ogallala Aquifer, followed the Canadian and Red Rivers down to the delta of the Mississippi in New Orleans, followed the main channel of the Mississippi River to the confluence of the Arkansas and the Mississippi, discovered the home of the Delta Blues, followed our way out the Tennessee River Valley into Tennessee, went to Smoky Mountain National Park, which is where about 70 different watersheds drain to birth the Tennessee River. And then we went up to the area around Dayton, Ohio, and the Miami River watershed to connect with part of the Ohio River Valley. And then we went down to Cairo, Illinois, which is where the Ohio River joins the Mississippi, before making our way back to St. Louis. And what I want to share is some of what we learned on this journey. And to do that, I just want to speak to you, because these stories are so powerful. And what we went to do, Penny will share her intention as we traveled in this way, but what we went to do was to do two things. One was to come to know who is this Mississippi in the heart of Turtle Island? And I found my answer to how Mississippi is masculine. And I want to draw a parallel to something I learned living in the Northern Andes in Colombia. Because if you ever visited the Northern Andes, you would quickly learn that one of the most powerful things the indigenous people have done in this part of the world is very powerful metallurgic techniques using gold to integrate gold into ceremonial objects. So the indigenous people of Colombia, of Ecuador, of Venezuela are famous for their gold artifacts. And gold for them symbolically represents the fertility that the sun brings to the earth. So gold is analogous to semen in sexual reproduction, and the sunlight that is impregnating the earth is a masculine energy from Father Sky. So gold is masculine, whereas Pachamama, the fertile earth that is receiving the sun's vital energy, is the sacred feminine. And that is a very important part of the cosmovisions of the indigenous peoples of the Northern Andes. In a similar way, Mississippi is masculine because of a name we actually have in modern jargon when we talk about the Mississippi River as the muddy Mississippi. Because the Mississippi is a system of watersheds that includes very large mountain ranges, Appalachia and the Rockies. It includes a huge system of moraines and silt deposits that are the birthplaces of the major rivers up north. And it includes massive flows of sediments into all these rivers that all drain into the Mississippi Delta. And these movements of sediments create alluvial floodplains all across the heart of Turtle Island, continually revitalizing the fertility of land. And that the engine of this is the incredible thunderstorms of the Great Plains. Sky God energy. Those massive supercell thunderstorms, squall lines, hail falling, tornadoes. I grew up in Tornado Alley in Missouri. The energy of those atmospheric beings are part of Mississippi, and Mississippi is all of it. So Mississippi is the energy of the Father Sky continually revitalizing Mother Earth through the sediment flows of rivers and storm systems, with massive tectonic plate activities forming the continent and holding the container of Mississippi. And so that's how I came to understand Mississippi is a lot more than a river. And I'm just beginning to understand what this really means. Another thing that we validated on this trip is that our dandelion strategy is working. Now, when we visited places like the Ozarks, the lower Missouri River, the Driftless region in Madison, the edge of the Great Lakes in Milwaukee, when we were in Amarillo, Texas, we were on the Front Range in Boulder, Colorado, we were in different places where people are now organizing to create their own bioregional learning centers as part of our planetary strategy, and that it's working. We also witnessed several things about different landscapes. And what I think I'll do now is I'll actually pass to Penny to share some of her insights and reflections, and then I might compliment with a story or two. But I want to give plenty of room for Penny to share. So Penny, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so good to be here with all of you. So I wanted to start my portion of this by just sort of framing what Joe's already said in a slightly different way, which is just to say that as an overarching way to think of this, way to think of the moment we're in, is that humanity is being called home. We're coming home, and we're coming home to Earth. The Earth herself is actually calling us home, meaning that the Earth and the universe is calling us to remember or to reconnect to the living processes of the universe and the planet itself, which is expressing those living processes. And so we're coming to know ourselves in the truest sense as a part of this living universe. And the only way that humans are going to exist in the future is if we are actually living bioregionally, which means that we're living in connection with our life places. We're living as part of life in our life places. So this was how we came into this pilgrimage. And so for Joe and I, we're on the journey too. We're on this journey of reconnection as well. And so we came into this pilgrimage with this intention to connect. And specifically, I came in with an intention to connect with what's real. So for me, I didn't actually really know exactly what I meant by that, but it was to me something that's like underneath all the noise of what humans are doing, this like noise that we're doing on top of what's real. So I came in with this intention of what's real, finding what's real, connecting with what's real. And what I found was first of all, just talk about some of the patterns that I noticed as we were on this journey. So the first was Joe mentioned that we went to several confluences and we went to several headwaters. So at the headwaters, what we saw and what we felt was, I like to describe it like a gathering. It's like this gathering of the waters from mountains or into lakes. But it wasn't just like there's a headwaters that just starts out of nowhere. There was a gathering of waters from into little flows, and then finally it would maybe form into a major stream that then we would call, that's the headwaters, that's the beginning of the river. But it's not the beginning of the river. The beginning of the river is a cycle of water that comes down and then it flows in these little trickles into a headwaters. So that was the first thing, the first pattern that we noticed. Then at the confluences, this was really interesting to me. At the confluences, there was a pattern of that the rivers, no matter how big, it could have been, at the first one we went to was the Missouri and the Mississippi, ginormous, like huge rivers with so much energy. And yet even that big of a confluence, when they came together, it was a gentle meeting. It was like the sound was just this.
The sound was bloop, bloop, bloop,
Yeah.
bloop. You could barely hear it. Bloop, 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 bloop.
So these huge energies come together and they meet in this peaceful way. And they don't just mix immediately. They come together and they start to sort of talk, is what it feels like. You can see the line for quite a ways of the two rivers meeting. And they're sort of talking and they're starting to interact and they're starting to get to know each other. One river is yielding to the other, depending on which one has more force. So one's yielding and then they're talking and then eventually they merge into one. And to me, this is like a very interesting metaphor for how to come into relationship. This is how we come into relationship. This is how we confluence. We don't just come in and like merge into one immediately, but we get to know each other. We take it slow, and then we unite. And the other pattern, or I don't know if this is a pattern exactly, but the other aspect that I started to feel more in my body, of course I know this intellectually, is that the landscapes are all one landscape. We would drive and then it would gradually transition into another landscape, which is a very distinct landscape from the other, but there's no separation. So the entire basin is one basin, and we could feel that in our body. So it's the experience of it that's the profound part of that. It's the experience of the connection across the entire landscape with the waters connecting all of it. And then there were some human level patterns that we ran into. So the first was an interesting pattern between me and Joe. I thought it was interesting anyway, was that we would go to the waters wherever we were, at a confluence or at a headwater, and then I would go immediately to the water. Like I was compelled. There was no,
Take off your shoes, go over there.
I had to go to the water right away and and touch it and immerse myself. And Joe would sort of stay back. Normally we had a drone and he would stay back and want to like fly the drone to get perspective of the landscape or the watershed. And then Joe would come down and join me at the waters and we'd hold ceremony. But it was this interesting pattern that we didn't plan. It just emerged every single time I would go straight to the water. And Joe would want to gain perspective, and then we would come together for the ceremony at the waters. The other pattern with the humans that we found, it was when we were in places where people hosted us, there's just incredible regenerative work happening every single place we went. And a lot of times it's somewhat isolated, like little projects or big projects that are somewhat isolated from each other. And there weren't too many people in the room thinking about how to weave those projects. But in every place, there were some. There were some people who were the weavers, and we would notice those people because that is what we're doing with the bioregional work, is in order to come into alignment with our life places at that scale, we have to weave these projects together. And the other part of the relational sphere that came up was personal, really personal, the personal level, and how core that is to this work. When we were in Boulder, which is my hometown, Boulder, Colorado, I was so excited to be in Boulder because finally there's bioregional work happening in my hometown. And so the event there was just like, this is such a big deal to me that this was happening. And then my mom went into the ER that same day, into the emergency room, and I really couldn't participate in the event because I needed to be with my mom. None of my other family was all gone. My sister, who is normally there with my mom, was gone on a trip. And so I needed to go be with my mom. And how interesting that is that relationships, like our personal relationships, are at the core of all of this. It's how coherent those relationships are,
or how
incoherent can pull us off of the track dramatically, or it can keep us in this work, in this devotion. So interesting. And then I just want to share one more thing, which was, I would say a couple more things, one just story was when we went to the Ozarks, which was near the beginning of our trip, and we met with David Hankey, who was one of the people who organized the first bioregional Congress that Joe was talking about. So he is an elder of this movement. And we were talking about how they would organize these congresses. And he said what they would do is they would all come together without an agenda, no agenda at all. They'd all come together, and what would happen is for about 3 days, they would connect with each other, they'd connect with the bioregion. And then after about 3 days, something would start to change. What he called, what would emerge is earth mind. So the group of people could actually start to sense what the bioregion was saying, what the bioregion needed, what the intelligence of the bioregion would start to inform the group. And then they would design from there. They would design what the action was that they were going to do. They'd design their strategy from earth mind. And this is so significant because the main principle is that we're not organizing a bioregion as humans. What we're doing is we're coming into alignment with the intelligence of the bioregion, and the bioregion is organizing us if we can listen. if we can hear it. And so, yeah, we took that earth mind. We're gonna we're gonna take that with us and use that in our gatherings going forward. And then one more thing I wanted to share is something that relates to my healing work. So I'm trained as a craniosacral therapist, polarity therapist, quantum touch therapist, massage therapist, just lots of energy medicines all together. And the core principle of the main modality that I studied is that we look for the underlying health before we look for the disease, to come into alignment with the health of the system, which then helps the system heal from the inside out in a human body. So the health with a capital H, the intelligence of the human system. And so what I recognized on this journey, there was a moment when we were with the buffalo in
North Dakota.
In North Dakota,
Mm-hmm.
and I could feel that in order to be a beneficial presence, humanity be a beneficial presence on Earth, we need to tune to the health of the Earth. And I could, for the first time, that health of the Earth became primary to me in that moment with the buffalo. I could feel the health, the regenerative potential of the Earth, and that if we can tune into that, instead of looking at, instead of looking at the human overlay, which is temporary, our sort of insane way that we're operating now, if we can tune to that health, then that disease or that insanity can start to heal from the inside out. So this is what I learned, connected up with my healing work, that of course the human body is a part of the Earth. If we can focus on that health, tune into that health, tune into the regeneration, the regenerative potential, and also the regenerative processes that are happening, that intelligence will guide us back home. So that's what I wanted to share. And I know Joe has a few more things he wants to add.
I'll share two more stories, and then we can go into some exchange and discussion. So one thing that I observed when we were on this trip was I really created a very strong, visceral distinction between the United States and Turtle Island. That I could see this United States thing, this nation state thing, was mostly fake. Like you'd go, everywhere you'd go, you would be with Turtle Island, you would be with this living tapestry of landscapes, and you might occasionally notice some nation state thing. Like, oh, welcome to Nebraska. Like, oh, there was a sign, but then you were just right back in the high plains. And so there's this way in which I could feel that difference, but I noticed almost like a vampire, like this parasite, which was, we saw fossil fuel infrastructure everywhere. So when we were in North Dakota and Montana, it was all of the hydraulic fracking. And when we were, and the signature object was black oil tanker cars on railroad tracks. They were just moving oil everywhere. And then we get down to like the Mississippi Delta down in New Orleans and past New Orleans. And there are these huge oil refineries and giant tankers sending oil out into the Gulf and into the ocean. It was like everywhere we went, there was this massive extractive infrastructure, including that when we went from Boulder, Colorado, and went down to Denver, went up in the mountains to the headwaters of the Arkansas River, and we went to the world's largest molybdenum mine, where they literally cut off one of the major mountain peaks of the central Colorado Rockies, destroyed it completely, took all of the tillings of it and filled 2 mountain valleys with toxic sludge to gather molybdenum, which you use in military purposes as an alloy to make armor-resistant and armor-piercing rounds and other advanced military applications. So we saw this complete destruction of completely, like absolutely sacred landscapes in the Central Rockies for molybdenum. And so we saw these kinds of things, and the overlay for us was that there were two levels of story happening at the same time. And so when Penny said that she saw the buffalo at Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, where we drove in, and there was a time where we're driving through and there are about 100 buffalo, and they're sort of on the road, and you have to drive real slow and hope they don't charge your car, and you can feel they are intelligent, undomesticated, dangerous, be respectful, they're really powerful beings. But we could feel the perennial grasses. We could feel that these animals could just grow and populate and return. And we were in Lakota territory. We could feel the potential of that. And then everywhere around us, no one's farming anymore because they're all part of the boom bust cycle of hydraulic fracking. And so what we saw was this juxtaposition of an ancient and timeless story that actually never ended. I mean, there was an earnest effort to end it with those buffalo, active genocide of the Lakota peoples by destroying the buffalo, but there's still some there, and they're reintroducing tiny numbers of them. But you could feel that regenerative life story never actually ended. It became really small and really hidden. But underneath it is Mississippi, this giant continental process of life, replenishing life across the heart of Turtle Island that's way bigger than the fossil fuel infrastructure, way bigger than the United States, way bigger than this temporary story of extraction and destruction and domination that is just going to peter itself out, just going to run itself out. And so we could feel as though we can trust those deeper processes because they're so much bigger. And that relates to the second story I want to tell, which is, I'll be somewhat brief, but I think it's really powerful, is when we got to the Delta, after visiting headwaters and confluences, the Delta meant something else. Because the Delta for us was not a place where a bunch of sediments and water go into the Gulf of Mexico. It was a place where stories return to their source. Because all life on Earth began in the ocean. And about 500 million years ago, some life started to go on land. 285 million years ago, amphibians and then later animal species came on land. But for 3.5 billion years, it was all in the ocean. For 500 million years, give or take, or a little less, about 10% of the total, 15%, has been on land. So we are all from the ocean. The ocean is the great grandmother. And what we could feel was all of those sediments and all of those waters are stories of Turtle Island returning to the great ancient grandmother sea. And we could feel, just like when we went to in Mississippi, the state of Mississippi, and we learned about the origins from the African slave culture. Of course, we knew about it, but we experienced the Delta blues music, rock and roll, the creation of these incredible art forms, jazz, blues, these art forms that were created by the African slaves. But they will tell you, they were as much from the Mississippi Delta as the African slaves. The land taught those people those rhythms. And that what we could feel was that the waters were cleansing the violence. The waters were cleansing the destruction. And that the waters were all gathering back in the sea in the Delta. And that the Delta represents our ability to trust that no matter how much harm humans do, Earth is stronger and Earth will clean up the mess. The question is if we're going to be a part of it. And that's what Penny said about coming back home. But if you go to the Delta and feel those stories from Montana and the Rocky Mountains, from the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, from these waters and these histories and this destruction, but also the indigenous people are still there. And I might mention, everywhere we went had an indigenous name. Let's see here, Illinois, indigenous name. Mississippi, indigenous name. Well, what about Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Dakota, Montana? There were indigenous names everywhere. We placed this temporary story on top of these other stories. And Penny and I visited Trail of Tears in Missouri, the Cherokee Nation, and the five great civilized tribes of the East and South that all got displaced to Oklahoma through the Ozarks. We could feel their presence because we had visited Cherokee people at the east entrance to Smoky Mountain National Park. They're still there in North Carolina. And so we could feel, and by the way, the Ojibwe people are still there at Lake Itasca in Minnesota. And the Blackfoot people are still in Montana, right? And so what we could feel was the presence of the layering of stories all in the same place, some of them real and deep, some of them shallow and self-terminating and temporary, and we could sit with it all because we were held in the vast container of the Mississippi Basin. And so we didn't have to hold it all. Mississippi did. But as Mississippi held it, we were able to feel and be present with it. And the human capacity sits right there inside something so much bigger. And so those are a couple of stories that I wanted to share. And now we'd love to open it up for any discussion, questions, comments, or wherever you'd like to take us. Bob and Penny, take us away.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Joe and Penny. I would ask that everyone keep their microphone muted until it's time for you to ask a question or make a comment. And in order to keep things relatively orderly, I'd like you to take a look at your Zoom toolbar, and you will find there a picture of a palm. It's labeled raise hand. If you don't see it there, look to the right and you'll see something called more, and it should be under the more. These toolbars are dynamic, and so it's hard to predict exactly where it's going to show up. And I believe we actually already have one question logged up in chat. Let me find it here. Where did it go? Here we go. Suzanne Taylor, I noticed earlier. I wonder if our community thinks it's best for us to concentrate on how regional governance could work rather than dealing with what we might do given the imminent threats from overshoot, El Nino, and the Trump regime.
Well, I would speak to that by saying that when Penny referred to the already existing intelligence of the bioregions, the bioregional governance is like saying homeostasis in your body is your body governing itself. And so bioregional governance and human governance systems are basically humans coming back into relationship with that larger life intelligence. And one of the ways we're seeing that happening that's very present in this moment is the reactions and the mobilizing to stop the data centers. That people are mobilizing across the political spectrum to stop the data centers all over the place because the data centers are fundamentally about taking your water. They're about other things too, but the primary threat is your water where you are. And by the way, you're dead if you don't have water, so it's pretty damn important. And so we saw evidence of bioregional governance emerging as an immune response to that threat to water and the way people are responding to data centers. And you can see that as a kind of proto-governance, because obviously governance can go way farther than that. But I just wanted to name that the place where governance comes from is in our relationship with the larger life place. And that's really going to be essential. And that is also the principle of subsidiarity, which is that you govern as close to where the decisions are made as possible and only go up in levels if you must to address the issue. Otherwise, you remain as local as possible, which is different from being libertarian or some other things, although it overlaps with it. It's basically a pragmatic principle. Make decisions as close to what you're governing as possible and don't go higher. And so like Washington, D.C. and K Street lobbyists should not decide your water in your town, right? But a watershed council should. And it can have multi-stakeholder representation where you live. So I think this way of thinking reveals a lot of existing infrastructure that is already in service to these living systems, like a watershed council would be. So I hope that's maybe a start into that. It's a big, nefarious topic, but hopefully that's a starting point. I don't know, Penny, do you have anything on that one?
No, that was good.
No, cool. Then I see Paul's got his hand up.
All right, yes. Thanks so much, Joe. Paul Taylor, please unmute
Mm.
yourself. There you go.
There we go. Unmute.
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Thank you. This is fantastic and wonderful work. And I've got a number of things, but I'll just focus on one for now, just so I don't forget it. But I'm living in Laramie, Wyoming. I'm from Australia. And I teach Indigenous wisdom from and been mentored by an Aboriginal elder for years. And water education is paramount to all that. Anyway, my work here, I've met a Lakota custodian for the Laramie Valley, and the Laramie Range is the easternmost point of the Rockies. And in the oral tradition of the Lakota, this is the Valley of the Thunder Beings, where we are. And according to their tradition, they have the oral tradition, the weather patterns that come out of this valley affect the whole continent, and which sort of resonates with what you were just talking about. That affects the Mississippi watershed as well, and just confirmation of what you're talking about. Anyway,
Paul, it makes me think. While you're talking, I'm gonna find a photo to make a point.
Yeah, I wanted to
Um,
say that we actually Joe didn't mention it, but we went there. We went to the confluence of the Laramie
The
and
Laramie and the North Platte.
and the North Platte River. And
Wow, yeah. And we
yeah,
went through we went through the Wind Valley, the Wind River Valley. Yeah.
and we felt that exactly what you're saying. So
right. That's just, yeah,
yeah,
it's amazing.
I
And the
think Joe,
Laramie runs into the North Platte, that runs into the Missouri,
exactly.
Mississippi. It's all, and our water ends up in the Gulf of Mexico from here.
Yeah,
You know.
Yeah,
it's
so
amazing.
what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a screen share for a moment to show a photograph that I took with the drone of this is the Three Rivers area, the headwaters of the Missouri River. And what I want to point to that is very much related to what Paul said. Well, this is in Montana and not Wyoming. It's basically just north in the same stretch of mountains. You go a little further south and it's still the Rockies. And I want you to notice these waters, like Penny said, the gathering of waters is from kind of everywhere, not just one place. But I also want you to notice back in the background on the mountains, notice the line of blue sky and the line of white clouds. The line of white clouds is what we saw basically thunderstorms forming as a continuous line along the mountains in this circle that we were in, because where we were, where the Missouri River is born, is this sort of bowl of mountains, of these rocky peaks. And I just want you to notice that it was raining in about 20 different places simultaneously that we could see, all of them forming part of the headwaters of the Missouri River. And this just strengthens what Paul was just saying, the thunder beings, and just look at those clouds. And so I just wanted to basically reinforce what you were saying with an
Yeah.
image, because
that-
that kind of pattern it was so present. Yeah.
And that's what the view that we see every day here in this valley. The thunder beings are operating
Yeah,
just like that, with the Rockies in the background there, and a
Mm.
little bit of snow on the top and the cloud cover. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just I realized that whatever the Missouri River is, the drainage itself, that those atmospheric phenomena are fundamentally a part of it, because they're continually generating the water.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you for that, Paul. It very strongly resonates.
Beautiful work. Beautiful work.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Um, thank you, Paul. And, while we're waiting for the next question to surface, I will just toss in a personal anecdote. I've resonated with your stop at Lake Itasca because I grew up in Minneapolis, and my folks and I vacationed there one time. I still enjoy telling people I have walked across the Mississippi River at that point. But I was recently quite stunned when Penny and I were chatting before we all got on. I recently ran across on social media a map where someone had highlighted the full entire watershed, the drainage system of the Mississippi, and how it spans so much of, did somebody say 41% of the continent or the United States, continental U.S. And so those many years ago, when I was having fun with the Mississippi, because I had seen it at Minneapolis as well, so I knew it was a big river. Um, Nevertheless, I had no idea of the impact, the import of the systems that govern the very principles that you're talking about in terms of governing bioregionally and locally, kind of thing. So it's fun to hear you tell these stories and the journey that you just completed. I see Paul has another question or a comment. Come on in, Paul. Oop, it's the wrong way. What have we done here? Let's see. Well, I'm just not.
Hello, Penny.
We're doing a round robin here. Doing a round robin here. Okay. I keep hitting the wrong one. Hang on. There we go. And
Okay.
well, yeah, I had called on Paul, so let's yes, do it this way. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Paul.
Back again. Sorry. Just another. You were talking about the 3 or 4 days and coming into this consciousness of feeling the land, and it's so Aboriginal. And my work with it just reminded me of the decision-making process in the legal system for Aboriginal people when I would bring elders together and they had to make decisions, and it might be about sharing the water between two different groups. They would sit down on that land and they would come to a consensus. And it might take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days, but they had to reach a consensus. They had to reach a good feeling that was mutual. And if there was conflict, they didn't make a decision. It was more important to keep the good feeling than it was to actually create a situation where certainly they wouldn't do an up and down vote. They had to reach consensus. And so that feeling was then shared amongst each other. And it just resonated with that process that you were talking about, where you all come to this common feeling after about 3 days of just being together. And then that's where the land comes through the people, I think. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I want to share is now that I've been living in South America for 7 years, and I'm from the Ozarks and in North America, starting to really have a deeper appreciation for the governance and peace building processes of the native peoples of North America that are distinctive. Like you're giving beautiful examples of distinctive qualities of the Australian continent and the Aboriginal wisdom, traditions, and practices. Just to recognize that the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota peoples, the Cherokee Nation, what was called the Iroquois Nation, which is now the Haudenosaunee. The Iroquois was a word made by the French, the six great nations of what are basically in the Great Lakes, and how significant the peace building processes have been and continue to be to this day. That we could really feel the presence of the vast maturity, like this profound depth of maturity of North American First Nations governing processes, which I think, I think there's a broader acceptance that the Aboriginal cultures, being so old, have so much to offer and show us because they're so mature, which is very, very true. And then we also have so much to learn from the North American continent in this way, as contrasted with some of the things that I would note in like the rainforests of South America, where you would have a cannibalistic group here and a warrior group. Basically, there were tribes that never constructed such strong and deep peace. Like the Haudenosaunee have held peace for 1,000 years after an extended period of violence. And they constructed their peace and then maintained it for a very long time. And so just recognizing what Turtle Island offers with respect to this, for us to learn from it is, I want to elevate it in a sense that is just like we need to recognize the significance of the Aboriginal knowledge systems. They're so significant that the North American tribal nation governing processes are so significant, and that we need to recognize them as well, because there's something about the North American continent that has brought those into being, just like there's something about the Australian continent, that in a similar way. So I just want to name that as well, because it was very present to us on our journey.
Yeah.
We were among those peoples, even though we didn't visit those peoples, we were in their lands. And so we could feel the presence of it.
And the depth of the generations that it took to build the culture, and to something that one person we met with, not on this journey, but we met with Oren Lyons in a previous journey, and something that he shared with us is that peace isn't just peace, like that you actually have to actively create peace continuously, and that is done through generations. It's through building a culture over generations and generations.
Also, there were about 16 steps where any tribal chief is selected, about 16 steps where the women could veto. It was like just so many ways that abusive male power would never be allowed within the Haudenosaunee systems, which is an active peace building process. So yeah. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Paul, for bringing that in.
Thank you.
And Alan, my gosh, so good to see you, Alan. Oh my gosh, it's been a while. How are you?
Oh, Elaine,
Hi.
Hi. So great to see you again, Penny and Joe. I
Me too.
I really appreciated what you took us through, because the part of the country you described is less known to me as the Northwest, where I live. I live in Portland. And I know you've been in the Northwest as well. And I was wondering, are there possible differences in patterns and in the interplay also between indigenous people and the land here in the Northwest that you know? That's a curiosity. And I live literally 10 minutes by bike from the Columbia River, which is quite mighty where I am. So I have great respect for that river as well. So just wondered have you, through your travels and the work you've done on bioregional aspects here, experienced any difference between the two parts of the country, these two parts of the country?
Yeah, I would say one thing we've observed in our interactions with First Nations in Cascadia, which is not a universal pattern, but it's more pronounced than in other places, is basically weaponized ego posturing that comes from social justice wounds and the nature of activism that the Northwest has a history of. So you think of like the green anarchist movement and some of the radical environmental movement and some of the social justice elements that are connected with it, that we would see distorted and false Indigenous leaders. They're actually Indigenous, but they're basically just traumatized. Like we would see a psychopathic, narcissistic person posing as a wisdom holder. And we would see that would never be allowed in some place like upstate New York. That the Haudenosaunee processes would have stopped that from being. But there is a parallel that is shared, which is that the political structure of the tribal councils created by the US and Canadian government break the real governance processes and create all kinds of harms. And we see that across the boards in North America, where the really good knowledge holders and the real tribal chiefs and the real clan mothers are often not the same people that are in the political apparatus communicating with the US or Canadian government. That is shared, that basically those are weaponized institutional structures of colonization. But I'm not saying that it's like a universal pattern of the Pacific Northwest, just that I think there's more tolerance of social justice signaling on the West Coast than in other parts of the North American continent. And then that's also expressed in some of the experiences we've had with a small number of Indigenous peoples, but people that would never be able to speak so publicly and visibly. Other parts of the country, they would be silenced by their own people. They'd be basically discredited as not legitimate representatives. And so that's something we've seen as a difference.
Yeah, I think I would just add what I felt in the indigenous people there was sort of like fierce, a fierce land protection because of all
This is a
the,
positive statement. Mine was a critical
yeah,
statement.
because of all the like deforestation that happens
Yes.
there. And
Yes.
so these people, the indigenous people are like in the last places where there's old growth and they are,
They're basically like,
they're
I will
like,
die on this hill is the kind of
yeah,
the place. That's the way it is on Vancouver Island, for example.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I felt that more like, when you get into New England and into Nova Scotia and into Quebec and all of this, that because of the Canadian treaty process being different, and because of the first contact being so much longer ago than out west, that there are some interesting differences. And also the difference in settlement patterns of the reservations. Because out east, the reservations were to push the people west. Out west, the reservations were usually that the indigenous people are still on their ancestral land. Whereas you like the Cherokee from, Georgia and North Carolina are pushed to Oklahoma, they're
Right.
no longer on their ancestral lands. So there are differences like that we also see. Um, but I would say we haven't done any formal study. We just have noticed some tendencies.
Yes.
Um, and overall, the bioregional perspective, whether the word is used, whether the word bioregion is used, is a place where there's very strong alliance and collaboration. Is that it's a common ground where the two-eyed way of seeing or the different kind of cosmovisions and worldviews actually work well together. And I would say Vancouver Island is a good example of that. Of a group like Greenpeace working with the First Nations, these sorts of collaborations that are famous for a good reason. So yeah, I don't know,
Good.
a little bit of exploration. And it's just so nice to see you. We missed you since the
Yes.
last time I saw you.
Yes. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Right. Thanks, Elaine. Tim, unmute yourself and go ahead and
Good. Thank you very much, Bob. So just a couple personal and kind of a networking set of comments here. First of all, I want to raise up the work of Jonathan Cloud here in Rochester and the Great Lakes Basin.
Our,
Our good friend.
and
And
Jonathan Cloud.
there it is. There it is. There's the book. Yeah. No, a
He's still
real.
he is our fiscal sponsor up until now. His nonprofit is.
Yeah,
So
there we go. No, seriously. Just, I mean, really wonderful vanguard, prophetic, quiet, able, just tremendous work. And with the Great Lakes Basin Network. And just this, I mean, just I really enjoyed learned a tremendous amount in your presentations and sharing. I kind of once again, because I know you were here in Rochester at one point several years ago. And I remember seeing you at the library downtown.
Mhm.
Um, at any rate, the other piece I'm curious about is I belong to the Pachamama Alliance, and they're coming up on celebrating their 30th anniversary, and in the process of kind of re-envisioning and this whole thing. And ever since John and I mean back in the day, when the first I think I actually, anyway, I attended a bioregional conference in somewhere in Massachusetts, or no, it's a green meeting. Anyway, here's the deal. Um, the um, the whole prospect of the whole concept of bioregionalism, this ancient truth, um, to me really feels like the leading uh, thought and physical reality, cultural, ambiance of the future. So what I'm wondering is about just the interpenetration or confluence. I love the word confluence of various of various organizations and movements and thought centers like Pachamama and bioregionalism in terms of integration and expanding and deepening a lived mindset and creation across Turtle Island, across the planet. I mean, I'm just blown away by it. But the point is being, just wondering, and not for a response here, but what the potential for confluence is among these various similarly, embedded and grounded, rooted um, groups of people.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the thing that we all share, and this will sound a lot like Aldo Leopold or Wendell Berry or any of those, the thing we share is place,
Mhm.
being organized by our places,
Mm.
which is incredibly powerful. And so, what I see with something like Pachamama Alliance is these intercultural exchanges, greater awareness of our connectivity, of our shared histories, of the significance of the diversity that we collectively hold, like the biodiversity of someplace like Ecuador, that's very different from the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. But together, the birds fly between them, right? They all come through Colombia, the birds' migrations. And it's in Ithaca, New York, is where they hold the ornithology lab at Cornell
Phenomenal.
that studies all, these sorts of connections what I see is the confluencing is in service to our places
Place.
and the connections between our places.
And the planet. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is very natural.
Yeah.
And I mean it literally, it's how nature does it, but very natural in that sort of,
Yeah.
that colloquial way of, and it just sort of happens. It just sort of flows.
Here's the final piece, just a quickie. What I'm curious about as well is the connection of us, of memory, of ancient awareness and wisdom, and certainly within indigenous cultures and the cosmos. So, astrology, whatever, astronomy, just kind of the role and the place of that in all of this emerging, expanding river of awareness or whatever. Yeah.
I think I would just add, I feel like that what's happening is these movements, these bigger movements like the consciousness movement, the regenerative movement, the bioregional movement, like these bigger movements are coming together because there's a holism starting to emerge, that basically the work people have done with their consciousness, with spirit, is coming together with this ground base, like this work on the ground with the bioregion, because it's actually all the same thing. The physics, the unified physics, the earth is an expression of unified physics, right? It's a living expression. So it's all coming together because that holism is starting to come
Wonderful.
into our bodies.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Tim. We look forward to next time there on the
Yeah.
Genesee River. And Penny's got an aunt and uncle that live in Rochester
Oh,
and have
no
a cabin
kidding.
out in the Finger Lakes. So
Oh, that's
we
right. That's
love that
wonderful.
part of the continent. So
That's great. So good to see you.
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you. I know we're just coming up on our closing hour. Oh, Joyce has jumped in there. Let's sneak in one more question.
sneak in one more. Yeah, sneak in one
Yeah.
more.
Before we do that, let me just comment. You may have noticed there are several suggestions for books and articles in the chat, and you might want to capture those if they interest you before we close the session. So you can be doing that. In the meantime,
Wait,
Joyce.
Bob, just Joe and Penny, please share with folks how they can continue to follow your work before we go to closing. Okay, so after your question.
Okay, so yeah, let's take Joyce's question or comment, and then we'll do that. Joyce, go ahead.
Yes, I love this presentation. I grew up in Minnesota, and of course, the Mississippi River was very precious. I lived in a little town called Owatonna that was named after an Indian princess who was cured at our local mineral springs. And now I live in Florida, the land of the Calusa Indians, who were completely exterminated by the whites, but the Seminoles moved in when they were driven out of the north. And we have a very active Seminole tribe, Betty Osceola and others working to save the Everglades, our own ecosystem here. And we also have very active Pachamama group in this area. And it's this Pachamama connection with South America is something that's very beautiful. But I want to mention Matthew Fox, Reverend Matthew Fox, and his movements of creation spirituality. The thing that's missing in a lot of these discussions is the spiritual connection with the earth and wanting to preserve Mother Earth and all living things. And Matthew Fox has developed a wonderful program of education and spiritual development. So I highly recommend his creation spirituality for people who are interested in this movement.
Excellent. Thank you, Joyce. Did we lose?
Yeah,
We're back.
we disappeared for a second and returned.
Oh, you have returned.
And I
Okay.
wanted to share one more image for everyone, if I could.
Okay.
I want to share one of the photos of the Delta, if I could.
Let me find you again so I can pull you back up.
Yeah, and I'll just do a screen share while you're looking for me, but I want to show everyone this image.
Oh,
So
great.
this is just an example of when I flew the drone up down, east of New Orleans, for you to see what the delta of the Mississippi River looks like.
Whoever's phone is on, please mute yourself.
I think it's Nari Hook. And what I wanted to show is just how.
Hang on a second. Sorry,
Yeah, if you can catch that.
I just muted somebody. I hope that's the one.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I just wanted everyone to have an impression of what the Mississippi Delta is like when you get out in the Gulf of Mexico, where all of the sediments that have been accumulated for millions of years are forming this endless tapestry of basically sediment piles and islands. And you can see this is one of the channels of the Mississippi River returning to the Gulf of Mexico. And if I was to ask you, where does it begin and where does it end? The answer should be nowhere and everywhere. And I just wanted people to have an image of that because most of us have never seen the Delta and certainly not from the air. When I flew, I just took a little drone and flew it up 1,000 feet in the air and took some photos. But I wanted you to see that mixing of stories and mixing of waters and mixing of sediments is truly profound. It's just truly profound. And so I wanted to give an image of that before we close today. So that's all. Thank you, Bob.
That's great. I'm so glad you did that. That's a beautiful image. Penny had put into the chat also some information about their Substack presence, and it's a good place to start to connect with them. Thank you also for the comment about Creation Spirituality Communities and Matt Fox. We are a program of Creation Spirituality Communities, and so I would suggest two things. First of all, the website for that organization is cscommunities.org. And there you'll find the full calendar of educational programs and other actions that you might want to be aware of and take part in. And what was the other thing that just was going to come out and it's just escaped my mind? The fact that this session, the recording for this session, will be posted on YouTube on the channel for Creation Spirituality Communities. So you'll be able to find that out there later tonight or tomorrow. All right. Penny Andrews.
Well, I
Would you
cannot.
step back in, please.
Yes, I cannot thank you enough, Joe and Penny. I take away two things that, as metaphors, speak to me really deeply. And I also take this concept from Terry Tempest Williams that what we need now is deeper than hope. And that's exactly what I think you two in the world are doing. And it's what you're calling us all to do and what we are being called to do by our Mother Earth. So thank you so much. And I would also underscore that if you check out the design school that they have founded, accessing lots of materials and resources, is very affordable, as well as an introductory glance. Much of it is available to just explore on your own. So, what a gift to the world you both are, and your wisdom keeps resonating. I hope we're doing this in a few years or next year or whatever, and more stories can come back to Global Kinship on your part. I thought I'd close with first a reading by Thomas Berry from Kathleen Dignan's The Book of Hours, beautiful book of Thomas Berry writing, and then with the final words from Walt Whitman. We cannot doubt that we have been given the intellectual vision, the spiritual insight, and even the physical resources we need for carrying out the transition that is demanded of these times. Transition from the period when humans were a disruptive force on the planet to the period when humans become present to the planet in a manner that is mutually enhancing. And to consider these words by Walt Whitman, who, along with the phrase, what would it take for you to feel native to where you are? What would it take to feel that where you are is sacred? So Walt Whitman writes, I know nothing else but miracles. To me, every hour of the light and dark is a miracle. Every cubic inch of space is a miracle. Every square yard of the surface of the earth is spread with miracles. Every foot of the interior swarms with miracles. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll see you in 3 months, 4 months down the road with our next edition of Global Kinship. Thank you, Penny and Joe, and may your travels and your teachings just ripple and ripple and ripple and empower and change this world around.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Bob. Thank you,
So,
everyone.
thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm.